The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training compound as Sarah Martinez carefully cleaned the bolt-action rifle in her hands. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, though her heart hammered against her ribs. 3 months into her military service, she had excelled in every area except one, marksmanship. The other recruits had noticed, and their whispers followed her everywhere she went. The shooting range stretched out before her like a concrete battlefield, with targets positioned at various distances. Some were simple bullseyes, others were human-shaped silhouettes that seemed to mock her every time she missed. Sarah had joined the army to prove something to herself and her family, but lately she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Her father had been a decorated Marine. Her brother served as a special forces operator, and her grandfather had fought in 3 different wars. Military service ran in her blood like a family tradition that couldn't be broken. When she announced her decision to enlist, everyone expected her to follow in their footsteps with natural ease. Nobody anticipated that she would struggle with something as fundamental as shooting straight. The other recruits were already assembling their weapons when Sergeant Rodriguez approached her station. His weathered face showed no expression as he watched her fumble with the rifle scope adjustment. Behind him stood Jake Sullivan, the best marksman in their unit, wearing his usual cocky grin. Jake had grown up hunting in Montana and could hit a target at 300 yards without breaking a sweat. Sarah tried to ignore the growing audience as more soldiers gathered around her station. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy pack during a long march. She had always been competitive, whether in academics or athletics, but something about holding a rifle made her hands shake uncontrollably. The shooting instructor called for attention, his voice cutting through the morning air like a sharp blade. Today's exercise would determine who advanced to advanced marksmanship training and who remained with the basic infantry unit. Sarah knew this was her chance to prove herself, but doubt crept into her mind like fog rolling over the mountains. As she positioned herself behind the firing line, Sarah noticed how steady the other recruits appeared. Their breathing was controlled, their stances were perfect, and their confidence radiated from every movement. She tried to mirror their posture, adjusting her grip on the rifle and settling into what she hoped was a stable shooting position. The first command echoed across the range, and 20 rifles lifted in unison. Sarah's weapon felt heavier than usual, and she struggled to keep the crosshairs steady on her target. The morning breeze picked up, causing the distant targets to flutter slightly. Adding another variable to an already challenging shot, her instructor had taught them about breathing control, trigger squeeze, and sight alignment, but putting theory into practice proved more difficult than Sarah had imagined. Every time she thought she had the perfect shot lined up, her heartbeat would cause the rifle to move just enough to throw off her aim. The command to fire rang out, and the range erupted in a symphony of gunshots. Sarah squeezed her trigger, feeling the rifle kick against her shoulder, but she already knew she had missed before the smoke cleared. Around her, other recruits were celebrating hits, while she stared at a target that remained frustratingly untouched. Jake Sullivan walked past her station, shaking his head with obvious disappointment. His target showed a tight grouping of shots near the center, while hers looked like she had been aiming at the sky. The embarrassment burned her cheeks as red as the setting sun, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear from the range entirely, but Sarah Martinez was not the type of person who gave up easily. Her family had taught her that failure was simply an opportunity to learn and grow stronger. As the other recruits packed up their equipment and headed back to the barracks, she remained at her station, determined to figure out what she was doing wrong. The mess hall buzzed with conversation about the morning's shooting exercise, but Sarah sat alone at a corner table, picking at her lunch without appetite. Every time someone laughed, she wondered if they were talking about her poor performance on the range. The taste of failure was more bitter than the coffee they served, and it lingered in her mouth like a bad memory. Jake Sullivan approached her table with his usual swagger, carrying a tray loaded with food. His uniform was pristine, his boots polished to mirror shine, and his confidence seemed to fill the entire room. He slid into the seat across from her without invitation, his pale blue eyes studying her face with obvious amusement. "Rough morning out there, Martinez," he said, taking a large bite of his sandwich. "Maybe you should consider transferring to the kitchen detail. At least there you can't hurt anyone with your cooking." His comment drew snickers from nearby tables, and Sarah felt her face flush with renewed embarrassment. She had dealt with bullies before, but something about Jake's casual cruelty cut deeper than usual. Perhaps it was because she knew he was right about her shooting. Or maybe it was the way the other soldiers seemed to hang on his every word like he was some kind of military celebrity. After lunch, Sarah found herself walking to the base library, seeking solace among the dusty books and quiet corners. She pulled several manuals on marksmanship from the shelves, hoping to find some technical detail that her instructors had missed. The books were filled with diagrams, formulas, and expert advice from decorated snipers. But reading about shooting was vastly different from actually doing it. An older sergeant named Williams noticed her studying and sat down at her table. His uniform bore the patches of multiple deployments, and his gentle eyes held the wisdom of someone who had seen both triumph and tragedy. He had been watching her struggle on the range, and unlike the other instructors, he seemed genuinely interested in helping rather than judging. "You know," he said quietly, "I once knew a soldier who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn when he first arrived. Shook like a leaf every time he pulled the trigger. Everyone wrote him off as hopeless, said he'd never make it through basic training." Sarah looked up from her book. Curious about where this story was heading, Sergeant Williams continued, "But that soldier had something special inside him. He refused to quit even when everyone else had given up on him. He spent every free moment practicing, studying, and improving. Eventually he became one of the finest marksmen I ever served with. Some people are born with natural talent, but others have to earn every shot through pure determination." His words struck something deep inside Sarah's chest, like a spark igniting dry kindling. She had always been the type of person who worked harder than everyone else to achieve her goals, whether it was earning a college scholarship or completing officer candidate school. Why should marksmanship be any different? That evening, after regular training hours had ended, Sarah returned to the shooting range with a borrowed rifle and a box of practice ammunition. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of home. She had grown up on a ranch in Texas, where the horizon stretched endlessly in all directions, but she had never learned to shoot, despite being surrounded by firearms her entire childhood. Her father had tried to teach her when she was younger, but she had shown more interest in books and horses than guns and hunting. Now she regretted not paying attention to those early lessons, wondering how different things might have been if she had embraced the family tradition from the beginning. Sarah set up at the closest shooting position and began working through the fundamentals that Sergeant Williams had outlined in the library. She focused on her breathing, taking slow, steady breaths and timing her shots with the natural pause between exhale and inhale. Her stance needed work, so she adjusted her feet and shoulders until she felt balanced and stable. The first shot went wide, missing the target completely and kicking up dirt in the distance. But something felt different this time, more controlled and deliberate than her previous attempts. She loaded another round, made a small adjustment to her sight picture, and tried again. This shot hit the target, though far from the center she was aiming for. As darkness fell across the range, Sarah continued practicing under the harsh glare of the overhead lights. Her shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil, and her eyes burned from squinting through the scope, but she refused to stop. Each shot was a small step forward, a tiny victory in her personal war against self-doubt and inadequacy. When she finally packed up her equipment and headed back to the barracks, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. The other recruits were already asleep, but she lay awake in her bunk, replaying every shot in her mind and planning tomorrow's practice session. 3 weeks of secret practice sessions had transformed Sarah's shooting from embarrassing to merely mediocre. But she knew it wasn't enough. The advanced marksmanship qualification was scheduled for the following Monday, and she needed to improve dramatically if she wanted to earn a spot in the specialized training program. That could change her entire military career. The weekend brought unexpected visitors to the base, a team of elite snipers from the special operations community. They were there to observe the qualification tests and potentially recruit promising candidates for their advanced schools. Sarah watched them through her barracks window as they unloaded equipment from their vehicles, moving with the fluid precision of predators who had mastered their craft through countless hours of training and real-world experience. Among them was a woman who immediately caught Sarah's attention. Staff Sergeant Lisa Chun stood barely 5 feet tall, but her presence commanded respect from the much larger men around her. Her uniform bore the distinctive patches of airborne and special operations units, and the rifle case she carried looked like it cost more than Sarah's monthly pay during the morning formation. Their commanding officer announced that the visiting snipers would be conducting individual assessments of interested recruits. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized this might be her only chance to receive expert instruction before the qualification test. When volunteers were called forward, she stepped out of formation despite the nervous butterflies dancing in her stomach. Jake Sullivan also volunteered, along with several other top shooters from their unit. Sarah felt out of place among the obviously talented marksmen, but she refused to back down now. Staff Sergeant Chun approached the group with a clipboard and studied each volunteer with the intensity of a scientist examining specimens under a microscope. "I'll work with Martinez," Chun announced. Pointing directly at Sarah, the other snipers paired off with different volunteers, leaving Sarah alone with someone whose reputation preceded her like thunder before lightning. She had heard stories about Chun's accomplishments in Afghanistan and Iraq, where she had served multiple tours as a sniper team leader. They walked to a secluded section of the range where Chun had set up a shooting position, overlooking targets at various distances. The equipment was unlike anything Sarah had seen before: high-powered scopes, custom rifles, and environmental monitoring devices that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. "Show me your natural shooting position," Chun commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sarah tried to remember everything she had practiced, settling behind the rifle and adjusting her body, according to the textbook principles she had memorized. Chun watched silently for several minutes, taking notes and occasionally adjusting Sarah's position with gentle but firm guidance. Her touch was professional and precise, moving Sarah's elbow slightly here, adjusting her cheek weld there, until the rifle felt like a natural extension of her body rather than an awkward tool she was struggling to control. "Your fundamentals are actually quite good," Chun said, surprising Sarah with the compliment. "But you're fighting yourself instead of working with your natural abilities. Shooting isn't about forcing the rifle to do what you want. It's about becoming one with the weapon until the shot happens almost by itself." They spent the next hour working on breathing techniques that went far beyond the basic instructions Sarah had received. Chen taught her to use her heartbeat as a timing mechanism, to fire between beats when her body was naturally still. She explained how environmental factors like wind, temperature, and humidity affected bullet flight, turning marksmanship from a simple point-and-shoot exercise into a complex calculation involving physics and intuition. The afternoon session focused on mental preparation and visualization, techniques that elite snipers used to maintain focus during high-stress situations. Chun had Sarah close her eyes and mentally rehearse each shot before taking it, imagining the perfect sight picture, the smooth trigger pull, and the satisfying impact on target. When they finally began shooting live ammunition, Sarah felt a transformation occurring within her mind and body. The rifle no longer felt foreign in her hands, and the target seemed to grow larger and more accessible with each shot. Her first group was tight enough to cover with a quarter, something she had never achieved before. Chun nodded approvingly as they examined the target together. "You have natural talent that's been buried under anxiety and overthinking," she explained. "Trust your instincts, trust your training, and let the shot surprise you. The moment you try to force it, you'll pull it off target." As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Sarah realized that she had learned more in one afternoon than in all her previous weeks of practice. But more importantly, she had gained something that couldn't be taught from books or manuals. Confidence in her ability to succeed when it mattered most. Chin packed up her equipment with the same methodical precision she applied to everything else. Before leaving, she turned to Sarah with the expression that might have been the beginning of a smile. "I'll be watching your qualification test on Monday. Don't disappoint me, soldier." Monday morning arrived with storm clouds gathering on the horizon, threatening to turn the qualification test into a battle against both targets and weather. Sarah woke before dawn, her stomach churning with nervous energy that no amount of coffee could settle. She had spent the weekend practicing Chun's techniques, but doubt still gnawed at her confidence like a persistent infection. The shooting range buzzed with activity as instructors set up targets at distances ranging from 100 to 600 yards. The qualification course was designed to test every aspect of marksmanship: precision, speed, and adaptability to changing conditions. Only the top 15% of shooters would advance to specialized sniper training, making this the most competitive test of Sarah's military career. Jake Sullivan arrived at the range looking relaxed and confident, joking with his friends and cleaning his rifle with casual efficiency. His natural ability had never been in question, and everyone expected him to easily secure one of the coveted advancement spots. He caught Sarah's eye and offered a mocking salute, his smirk suggesting that he considered her presence more entertainment than competition. Staff Sergeant Chien appeared at the range entrance, accompanied by several other special operations personnel who would be observing and evaluating the candidates. Sarah felt Chun's eyes find her in the crowd, and the slight nod she received was somehow both encouraging and intimidating. The pressure to perform well had never felt more intense. The test began with precision shooting at stationary targets, where candidates had unlimited time to demonstrate their accuracy at various distances. Sarah approached her assigned firing position with Chin's voice echoing in her memory, reminding her to trust her instincts and let the shot surprise her. She settled behind the rifle, adjusted her scope, and began the breathing routine that had become second nature during their training session. Her first shot struck the target dead center, earning an approving nod from the range instructor. The second and third shots followed in rapid succession, creating a tight group that would have been impossible for her just weeks earlier. Around her, other candidates were achieving similar results, but Sarah felt a growing confidence that she belonged among their ranks. The wind picked up during the second phase of testing, adding complexity to shots that had seemed straightforward moments before. Sarah watched the flags positioned along the range, calculating drift and elevation adjustments the way Chun had taught her. Mathematics had always been one of her strengths, and now she applied those skills to the physics of long-range shooting with surprising success. Jake Sullivan was having his own challenges with the changing conditions. His natural talent had always allowed him to succeed without deep technical knowledge, but precision shooting in adverse weather required understanding that couldn't be faked. Sarah noticed his frustration growing as several shots missed their intended targets, his confidence wavering for the first time since she had known him. The final phase tested rapid engagement of multiple targets at varying distances, simulating the type of decision-making and marksmanship required in real combat situations. Candidates had 90 seconds to engage 12 targets in a specific sequence, with penalties for missed shots and timing failures. This was where natural ability mattered less than mental preparation and disciplined technique. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she waited for the start signal, but she forced herself to visualize the entire course the way Chun had taught her. In her mind, she rehearsed each target engagement, calculated the required scope adjustments, and planned her breathing between shots. When the buzzer sounded, she moved with purpose rather than panic. Her rifle spoke 12 times in measured rhythm, each shot deliberate and controlled despite the pressure of the countdown clock. She trusted her training and instincts, allowing muscle memory to guide her movements while her conscious mind remained calm and focused. The final buzzer sounded just as she engaged the last target, leaving her uncertain about her performance but proud of her execution. The scoring process seemed to last forever as instructors tallied results, and compared performances. Sarah stood with the other candidates in formation, trying to read the expressions of the evaluating personnel for clues about her fate. Chun remained impassive throughout the process, offering no indication of how Sarah had performed relative to the competition. Finally, the range commander stepped forward with the qualification results. Names were called in order of ranking, starting with the lowest passing scores and working upward. Sarah listened as familiar names were announced, her anxiety building with each passing moment. Jake Sullivan's name was called in the middle of the rankings, respectable but not exceptional. When the commander reached the top 5 qualifiers, Sarah's name still hadn't been announced. Disappointment began to settle over her like a cold fog, despite her improvement over the past weeks. She had given her best effort, but apparently it wasn't enough to secure advancement to the specialized program she desperately wanted. Then the commander announced the top qualifier, and Sarah heard her own name echo across the range like thunder. The other candidates turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from surprise to respect, while Jake Sullivan's face registered pure disbelief. She had not only qualified, she had achieved the highest score of any candidate in recent memory. The Advanced Sniper School was located in the mountains of Colorado, where thin air and unpredictable weather created the perfect environment for testing human limits. Sarah arrived at the facility 3 weeks after her qualification triumph, carrying her gear and a newfound confidence that felt as solid as the rifle on her back. The other students were veterans from various military branches, each handpicked for their exceptional marksmanship abilities. Staff Sergeant Chun had recommended Sarah for the most challenging course offered, a 6-month program that combined traditional sniper training with special operations tactics. The curriculum included camouflage and concealment, surveillance techniques, advanced ballistics, and psychological preparation for the mental demands of precision warfare. Only 60% of students successfully completed the program, and the washout rate climbed higher every year. Her fellow students initially viewed Sarah with skepticism, wondering how someone so new to military service had earned admission to such an exclusive program. The whispers followed her through the barracks and training areas, questioning whether she truly deserved her spot or had received special consideration because of her gender. Sarah had dealt with similar doubts throughout her life, and she channeled that familiar anger into motivation for the challenges ahead. The first month focused on fundamental skills that separated amateur shooters from professional snipers. Students learned to calculate environmental effects with mathematical precision, accounting for variables like barometric pressure, humidity, and the Coriolis effect caused by Earth's rotation. Sarah's engineering background proved invaluable as she quickly mastered the complex formulas that left some veteran soldiers struggling. Physical conditioning pushed everyone to their breaking points and beyond. Students crawled through mud, climbed rocky cliffs, and carried heavy equipment across miles of mountain terrain. The instructors showed no mercy, demanding excellence in every exercise while constantly reminding students that failure in the field meant death for themselves and their teammates. Sarah's smaller frame initially worked against her, but her determination more than compensated for any physical disadvantages. Camouflage and concealment training revealed the artistic side of snipercraft. Students learned to become invisible in any environment, using natural materials and specialized equipment to blend seamlessly with their surroundings. Sarah discovered an unexpected talent for this aspect of training, creating ghillie suits and hide sights that impressed even the most experienced instructors. Her attention to detail and patience served her well during exercises that required remaining motionless for hours while maintaining constant vigilance. The psychological preparation proved more challenging than any physical demands. Students faced simulated combat scenarios designed to test their ability to make life-and-death decisions under extreme stress. Mock villages populated with actors playing civilians and enemy combatants forced students to distinguish between legitimate targets and innocent bystanders in split-second decisions. The weight of potential consequences pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like lead, but she learned to compartmentalize emotions and focus on mission objectives. Jake Sullivan had also been accepted to sniper school, though he was assigned to a different class that started 2 weeks after Sarah's. When he arrived at the facility, his attitude had changed dramatically from the cocky bully she remembered. The qualification results had humbled him, and he approached Sarah with genuine respect rather than his previous arrogance. They found themselves studying together in the evenings, sharing techniques and pushing each other to excel. Advanced ballistics. Training introduced concepts that seemed to belong more in a physics laboratory than a military classroom. Students learned to account for bullet drop, wind drift, and environmental effects at distances exceeding a mile. The mathematics involved required understanding of trajectory curves, energy transfer, and projectile dynamics that challenged even the most technically minded soldiers. Sarah thrived in this academic environment, often helping classmates who struggled with the theoretical aspects. Live-fire exercises took place on ranges that stretched across valleys and up mountainsides, with targets positioned at distances that seemed impossible for human accuracy. The rifles they used were precision instruments worth more than most people's cars, equipped with optics that could resolve details invisible to the naked eye. Sarah learned to treat these weapons as extensions of her body, understanding their capabilities and limitations as intimately as her own. The halfway point of the program brought comprehensive evaluations that determined which students would continue and which would be reassigned to other military specialties. Sarah had excelled in every area of instruction, earning praise from instructors who rarely offered compliments. Her shooting scores consistently ranked in the top 5%, while her academic performance exceeded that of students with years more experience. During a particularly challenging field exercise, Sarah found herself paired with a veteran Marine who had served multiple combat tours as a sniper team leader. Sergeant Rodriguez treated her as an equal from the beginning, sharing hard-won wisdom about survival and effectiveness in hostile environments. His mentorship provided insights that couldn't be learned from textbooks or classroom instruction. The exercise required them to infiltrate a mock enemy position, gather intelligence, and eliminate specific high-value targets without alerting security forces. They spent 2 days moving through dense forest, avoiding patrol routes and establishing observation positions that provided clear fields of fire. The mission demanded every skill they had learned, combining marksmanship with tactics, patience, and teamwork. When the moment came for Sarah to take her assigned shot, she felt the familiar calm that had become her trademark. The target appeared in her scope at a distance of 700 yards, moving slowly along a predetermined route. Environmental conditions were challenging, wind gusting across the valley, temperature dropping as evening approached, and visibility complicated by shifting shadows. She made her calculations, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger with the confidence of someone who had found her calling. Graduation day arrived with crystal-clear skies and mountain air so pure it seemed to sharpen every sound and image. Sarah stood in formation with the 23 other soldiers who had survived the grueling 6-month program, wearing the distinctive patch that identified her as a qualified military sniper. The journey from struggling recruit to elite marksman felt like a lifetime compressed into months of intense focus and determination. Staff Sergeant Chen served as the guest speaker for the graduation ceremony, her presence lending weight to an already significant moment. As she addressed the assembled graduates and their families, her eyes found Sarah in the formation and held her gaze for just long enough to convey approval and pride. The woman who had transformed Sarah's understanding of marksmanship now spoke about the responsibilities that came with their newly acquired skills. Sarah's parents had flown in from Texas to witness her graduation, their faces glowing with pride that made all the pain and struggle worthwhile. Her father, the decorated Marine, had tears in his eyes as he watched his daughter receive recognition for achieving something that had once seemed impossible. Her mother clutched a camera, documenting every moment of the ceremony with the devotion of someone preserving precious memories. The class ranking was announced during the ceremony, with Sarah finishing 3rd overall among a group of exceptional soldiers. More importantly, She had been selected for assignment to an elite special operations unit that deployed worldwide on classified missions. The opportunity represented everything she had dreamed of when she first enlisted, and more than she had dared hope for during those early days of missing targets. Jake Sullivan had also graduated from his class, finishing respectably in the middle of his group's rankings. The experience had transformed him from an arrogant bully into a professional soldier who understood that natural talent meant nothing without dedication and continuous improvement. He approached Sarah after the ceremony with genuine congratulations and an admission that watching her succeed had motivated him to work harder than ever before. The assignment orders arrived 2 weeks later, directing Sarah to report to a classified facility where she would join a joint special operations team. The mission details were heavily redacted, but she understood that her training was about to be tested in real-world situations where lives depended on her ability to perform under pressure. The thought was both thrilling and sobering. Before departing for her new assignment, Sarah returned to the original training base where her journey had begun. The shooting range looked smaller than she remembered, and the targets that had once seemed impossibly difficult now appeared routine and manageable. She found Sergeant Williams in the same library where he had first encouraged her to persevere, and thanked him for believing in her when no one else would. The young recruits currently struggling through basic marksmanship training reminded Sarah of herself just months earlier. She watched them fumble with rifles and miss targets by wide margins, their frustration and embarrassment clearly written on their faces. One soldier in particular caught her attention, a quiet young man who shook visibly every time he approached the firing line. Sarah approached the struggling recruit during a break in training, offering the same kind of encouragement that had once meant everything to her own development. She shared Chun's breathing techniques and visualization methods, watching as the soldier's posture improved and his confidence grew. The transformation wasn't immediate or dramatic, but she could see the seeds of improvement taking root. The instructor supervising the range was the same sergeant who had witnessed Sarah's early failures and later triumphs. He watched her work with the struggling recruit and nodded approvingly, understanding that teaching others was often the best way to demonstrate true mastery of any skill. When Sarah finished her impromptu lesson, he pulled her aside for a private conversation. "You know," he said with a smile, "I've been doing this job for 15 years. And I've seen hundreds of soldiers come and go. Most of them I forget within a few months, but there are always a few who leave a lasting impression. You're one of those few, Martinez. Not because you became the best shooter, but because you never stopped trying to get better." His words carried special meaning because they came from someone who had witnessed her entire journey from the beginning. Sarah realized that her story wasn't really about becoming an expert marksman. It was about discovering the power of persistence and refusing to accept limitations that others tried to place on her capabilities. As she prepared to leave for her classified assignment, Sarah thought about the twisted path that had brought her to this moment. The humiliation on the shooting range had seemed like the end of her military dreams, but it had actually been the beginning of something much greater. She had learned that natural talent was less important than willingness to work, and that the most satisfying victories came after the most difficult struggles. The rifle she now carried was the same model that had once felt foreign and uncontrollable in her hands. Now it was as familiar as breathing, an extension of her will that responded to her commands with precision that bordered on supernatural. But more than mastering the weapon, she had mastered herself, conquering fear, doubt, and the limiting beliefs that had once held her back from achieving her full potential. Her new unit was waiting, along with challenges that would test everything she had learned and more that she couldn't yet imagine. But Sarah Martinez was ready for whatever came next, armed with skills that couldn't be taken away, and confidence that had been forged in the crucible of apparent failure transformed into ultimate success.